Evening. I am the Reverend Charisma Jean Marie, and I serve as the Dean for the Disciples Divinity House at Vanderbilt. I also sit on the Pro Reconciliation Commission here in Tennessee, and I'm so excited about being here tonight. 2 weeks ago, the region of Tennessee, of Disciples Christ Christian Church, Tennessee region, we assembled in Memphis, Tennessee, where a workshop for Project 2025 was hosted. And during that workshop, it was engaging and very informational, and we left there wanting more. We left there enlightened, educated, and wanted to continue the conversation, specifically because early voting has started. Here in Tennessee, early voting started in Nashville last Wednesday. And so this conversation tonight is really a conversation, what I would like to call a table talk conversation with family members from our own individual families, but also family members from our community and our churches. Voting, while it is an individual right, it has communal impact. And so this conversation is about why is it important for us to vote in the spirit of loving our neighbors. And so to get started, I am excited and proud to invite three house scholars from the Disciples Divinity House, Marcy, Foster, and Madeline, to join me. As they join me this evening, so that they can lead a conversation about democracy. So Foster, Marcy, and Madeline, will you join me by turning on your camera? Turning on your camera. We've heard over and over again that democracy is on the ballot. And so tonight we want to have a conversation with you about what that means. But to get started, we have three house scholars who are all Vanderbilt Divinity students who are pursuing a theological education. They're pursuing careers to become scholars and faith leaders. And the theological has always been political. And so I'm grateful for their yes in this conversation. So I want to get started with Foster. Foster, won't you introduce yourself and tell us what's democracy mean to you? What's democracy mean to you? And what is the perceived threat in this election as it relates to democracy? You can unmute. Can you hear me, Foster? Okay, try that.
Okay, it's working now. All right, so I am a second year MDiv student right now at Vanderbilt Divinity School. My focus is in my studies is religion and economic justice. So the question of democracy is something that comes up a lot actually in terms of economics. But I guess right now I'm going to talk about more generally what democracy means to me. And for me, I think democracy means equality, and not just equality in terms of one's legal status or even one's formal status under the government, but really equality across the board. So this includes economics as well, and also social. So what I mean, what I kind of juxtapose that against is democracy that we have now. As we see someone like Elon Musk, or even someone who's more democratic, that's kind of in power and has a lot of money, is someone who really influences democracy right now. And I see that as part of a failure in the democratic system of allowing someone with so much money and power and wealth to be able to influence really the democracy of the United States, and not necessarily someone uh, who lives paycheck to paycheck. So when I think of democracy, I think of equality across the board, not just in the eyes of the law, but also in your own life with other people. And going after that, the question of what is on the line in this election, as I was thinking through that, I remembered a quote that I actually had read by a Guyanan historian, Walter Rodney, if anyone's heard of him. He wrote a paper called People's Power, No Dictator. And he defines a dictator, especially in the modern era, as one of an absolute ruler who has to fabricate an elaborate cult of personality to prove that he is more intelligent, more potent, and generally superior to any other human being. Um, and that just, if you've really watched the election in the past 4 years, and even before that, you can kind of see who has created a cult of personality around him. And this is further exemplified in Project 2025. Um, and you can see that later on, but they'll talk about something called the unitary executive theory, which is something that is very prominent in the Project 2025 framework, where the executive branch, the presidential branch, has complete control over everything. So what we're really missing then is we're not necessarily voting on democracy in its true form for me. We're really voting on democracy as it has always been. We really want to see that the question is, how do we want to do the work of transforming the society? Do we want to do it under Kamala Harris or do we want to do it under Donald Trump? And I think that's the question we need to be asking when we think of democracy. And then we can figure out under whose government are we able to really find out what democracy truly looks like. And I think there's a clear choice, especially after reading Project 2025 and just looking at the character of Donald Trump, in my opinion. Kamala Harris would be someone that is better to lead the country in terms of how democracy has always been. So yeah. I guess that is it for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Foster.
Yeah.
Marcy, why don't you come on and share a little bit about who you are and what does democracy mean to you? Try it now.
There we go. All right. Good evening. My name is Marcy Mazzafredley. I'm a first year here at Vanderbilt Divinity School. I'm in my first year here. I'm a resident at the Disciples Divinity House, and this will be my second presidential election I'll be voting in. At the school, I'm looking to specialize in religion and social advocacy. So, democracy is something that is always on my mind and is something I've studied for the last 4 years as I studied poli-sci in undergrad. To me, democracy is the most foundational part of our country's political landscape. Power belonging to the American people is not just this false idea that the writers of the Constitution had, it was a promise to the American people. And so while this power was very selective for a few in society then, now we're keeping this promise and should demand that our elections hold sanctity for all people and not just the powerful white elite. It's clear that democracy is in danger in this election. We saw a glimpse of that as the threat during January 6th, the coup that was attempted in 2021, and the campaigning that Donald Trump has been running on ever since then. An example was that during a campaign rally in 2023 and a town hall interview, should Trump win a second presidential election, he stated that he would be a dictator on day one. The threat of this authoritarian language isn't just a promise to abuse power, but it's a warning for those who don't agree to fall in line. We saw this warning become action during January 6th as we watched the alt-right extremists and Christian nationalists storm our Capitol building. And this was influenced by Trump, and the people were validated in this attempt to overturn our democracy as we know it very violently as they tried to end the certification of the fair 2020 presidential election results. And ever since, he's praised those individuals, he's protected them. And this violence will really only be heightened if we do not use this election now to vote to protect human rights and defend our democracy as Americans. And so, democracy, freedom, agency to live as one pleases, and the protection of human rights, these are all things that have been really, really important to me. And one of the biggest threats about this election for me is really, how fast my rights as a woman in a same sex relationship can be stripped from me. The wedding to my partner, which I've been planning with her and that we wish to share with our family come fall of 2027, it's scary to think that it may not be possible or legally recognized or even federally protected. This was clear with Roe when Roe versus Wade was overturned. So, what is stopping them from overturning my right to marry a woman that I love? Within the 900-page manual of that is Project 2025, to strip, these personal liberties away, there's power outlined to be given to the executive branch and to strip away non-discrimination policies that me and my partner very much need. My partner and I, we are going to face an uphill battle against hate and bigotry, and it will be even more heightened and solidified at the federal level if our democracy is taken away. Our right to start a family and adopt a child or have access to health care, which can help us biologically carry children, and the choice to therefore do so is at threat. And the legal recognition of our marriage hangs in the balance. If we have a dictator in a seat where a qualified president is supposed to sit, the foundation of our Constitution fails. The threat to democracy is very personal for me. It's personal to the love of my life. It's personal for you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. Such a moving, passionate piece there. And finally, Madeline. Madeline is I believe, second year House Scholar at Disciples Divinity House. Madeline, won't you introduce yourself and share with us, what does democracy mean to you? And what's the perceived threat here in this election?
Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline Roach. I'm in my third year of study at Vanderbilt Divinity School, and I have been living at the Disciples Divinity House for 2.5 years now. I am concentrating my studies in pastoral and prophetic congregational leadership, as well as religion, the arts, and contemporary culture. And I think a lot about how we come together in community, and how we are impacted by the things we see, the things we read, the things we sing, the things we hear from the pulpit, uh, informing our faith and informing our identity. I have personally seen how much democracy can impact people's lives on a very local level. In 2018, my mom started working for our state representative, who was the mom of a girl that I had grown up doing Girl Scouts with, and ran as a mom on a mission as part of the Blue Wave in 2018. Through my mom's work with this representative, I have seen how much local politicians can make a difference in their community, both at a state level and even on a smaller scale for individual residents who live within their districts. I've seen people regain access to Medicare, Medicaid, and be able to access life-saving medical care. I've seen people be connected to services that can help them keep the lights on, and communicate with the electric company when they've fallen on hard times. And in the first session that our representative was in the State House in Illinois, over 1,000 bills were passed. And I saw with those bills how much people were energized and given hope, as well as material changes in their lives. But since moving to Tennessee, I've seen a different story told. Last year, I saw the Tennessee Three challenged, and two of the members, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, expelled from the House for joining with the community they were elected to represent. I have seen voices silenced and constituents thrown out of the chamber for holding signs, for protesting, for daring to cry at the fact that children were killed in their school. I have seen the way that democracy can fail when people take power and refuse to honor the fact that we all voted and that there are elected representatives there trying to represent the needs of their community. We see democracy on the line in our local election, as well as in the larger national election. Here in Nashville, we've seen voter suppression already this election cycle. Since early voting started last Wednesday, we've seen troubles in Antioch, which is predominantly a neighborhood of color. We've seen the power go out at the polling place for hours. We've seen people turned away for not having their voter registration cards, despite that not being a legal requirement to vote in the state of Tennessee. We've seen how important our votes are because we see how hard they're trying to get us not to vote. We see how hard they make the process when we have to wait in line for hours, when we're denied access to food and water in those lines sometimes, when we're turned away at polling places. We know that democracy is important because they wouldn't be trying to stop us if it wasn't. This year in Nashville on the ballot, we also have a transit initiative in the referendum section. And this is a great opportunity for democracy because it will increase people's access to getting around town. It will improve the jobs that people are able to access. It will increase affordable housing in Nashville. And transit also impacts our ability to vote, right? We have to be able to get to our polling place. So in your local community, whether that's Nashville or somewhere else, I encourage you to research the referendums that are going to be on your ballot, research all of the candidates, go down the ballot, don't just stop at the president, and remember how big of an impact local elections can have on each of us.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marcy. I want to invite all three of the House Scholars back, Foster, Marcy, and Madeline. And as we close out this section, Madeline, you've named for us locally what we're already seeing around voter suppression. Tennessee knows voter suppression. We've been dealing with this for years, and it really went viral last year, and then really in terms of the reality of this election this past weekend. What is the hope as you all think about the future of this country? This is all three of you, second opportunity to vote, to put your card on the table to decide who will be the next president of the United States of America. I often say the most patriotic thing, the most American thing is our democracy. It's our power to choose. And that in itself is being threatened. That is on the ballot this election season. And so to the future of our country, speak to us now, speak to the present, offer us words of hope. Foster?
Yeah, I guess my hope in the future of democracy is really in movements of solidarity. It's in unions and cooperatives and grassroots movements. And we find it in my own experience here at the University of Vanderbilt in our graduate student union. We are actually fighting for our democratic voice in our work and where we're spending most of our time. So my hope is for now and also in the future is for us to realize that I think before we can really find true democracy in politics, we really need to find our democracy at work. Because right now our system of democracy is really only geared toward a certain group of people. And I think we need to find ways in building solidarity together and to find something different across lines of race, gender, class, ethnicity, etc. I think that's the only way in which we can really have a sustainable future in a true democracy. And it's happening now in our, in the state of Tennessee, whether it's here at Vanderbilt or even at different cooperatives that are being formed right now, especially in Nashville, along the lines of housing and grocery store. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah.
Marcy, what is your hope? What is your hope for democracy?
My hope is that we lead with love and care. We listened to at the Divinity House a couple of nights ago, we listened to some amazing people in ministry who talked about their own personal stories and journeys through gender transformation, identity transformation, ministry transformation. And in all of their stories, it was the constant understanding of care and love for one another. And going into a voting booth and knowing you're voting because you love your neighbor or because you care for human beings and you want to see people have rights. And it's not just your sister, your best friend, the person that you went to college with. It's everybody. It's people that you don't look like, speak like, vote like. If we can lead with love and care for just people, our democracy can be transformative. And the way that we start that is honestly doing the right that we have, which is going into a voter booth and voting for the next president, voting for the next local elections, as Madeline has said. And it's vital, but we cannot forget how important it is, even for Christians as well in the church. Lead with love, lead with care.
Thank you. And finally, Madeline, will you offer your words of hope?
I'd like to offer this reading from Luke 4. Jesus went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." The word of the Lord. As we join together against a rising tide of Christian nationalism, I hope that we can remember that there is a different way to be Christian, that there is a way within our Gospels to live the teachings of Jesus, to come to truly proclaim good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom for those who have been oppressed and imprisoned, that we might be the fulfillment of this prophecy.
Beautiful. I invited house scholars to join us, and I didn't know I was getting prophets tonight. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you all so much for sharing your heart, for sharing your own personal stories and your witness and your hope. I want to invite those who are here with us on Zoom, remind you that this is a conversation. We are at the table breaking bread with you. And so invite you to offer questions there in the chat. questions or comments. We want to engage with you. Now, as we transition to the second part of this conversation, I want to say again, thank you to Madeline, Marcy, and Foster. Thank you for your witness. Thank you for engaging us. And this is the future of the church. And I tell you tonight, I am hopeful because the future looks bright. This is the future of the church, and this is the future of our country. So thank you all so much for your voice. Again, we want to welcome our audience. Thank you for joining us, our community here, and invite you. This is a conversation, so please there in the comments, offer your questions, your comments, engage us. This is a conversation. So many of you might have, maybe, I don't want to make the assumption, there's been conversation about a manifesto, Project 2025, that is out. And it is a 200 and some odd page. And so we thought it was just important for us to engage you on topics, highlight topics on Project 2025 that perhaps could be missed in the political rhetoric, right? And so tonight, we've invited faith leaders, names and people you know very well because they are always on the front line, to come to engage us around Project 2025. This next speaker, I don't have to introduce because she is always with the people, for the people, the Reverend Dr. Judy Cummings. Will you come and join us and share your piece on Project 2025?
Thank you and good evening. I am Reverend Dr. Judy Cummings. I'm a public justice theologian, retired pastor in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve as chair of the Pro-Reconciliation Anti-Racism Commission for the Tennessee Region Christian Church, and I also chair and serve on several justice-seeking boards and commissions, including co-chair of the Disciples Divinity House at Vanderbilt. And so I want to offer my deep appreciation to the Disciples Divinity House students who just shared with us about democracy and why it's on the line, why it's on the ballot. They have certainly laid a foundation as we now turn to Project 2025. Project 2025 is among the most profound threats to the American people. We've read Project 2025. It is 920 pages, a mandate for leadership so that you don't have to. But what we discovered when we read it is that it is a systemic, ruthless plan to undermine the quality of life for millions of Americans, remove critical protections, dismantle programs for communities across the nation, and prioritize special interests and ideological extremism over people. From everything from attacking overtime pay, student loans, reproductive rights, to allowing more discrimination, pollution, price gouging. Those behind Project 2025 are preparing to go to incredible lengths to create a country only for some of us, some, and not for all of us. Project 2025's goal is to transform the United States from a democratic country to an authoritarian system, a government that rules with one strong power and greatly limits political freedom and opposition, essentially forcing the country to conform to a Christian nationalism and modern-day white supremacist society, removing rights from any opposing group of people. Now, this policy playbook, known as Project 2025, is a manifesto, as Reverend Charisma said. It is written by the Heritage Foundation. 150 of those 920 pages are all about how to destroy the environment. And so I want to spend my time highlighting the impact of Project 2025 on the environment. It's hard not to mention Donald Trump's name when discussing Project 2025, even though he's not an author. He is intricately enmeshed in the project, and so it's hard not to mention his name. The true goal of Project 2025 is to create, as I said, a far-reaching government that limits your rights while giving corporate interests free rein over our economy and our future. And so as we talk about what it means, what the impact is on the environment, we have to understand that and remember that there are advocates who have been pushing back against for and advocating for our environment, for environmental justice. One would think that everyone, particularly those who profess a knowledge of God as creator, would want everyone to enjoy benefits such as clean air, water that is not polluted, and help when disasters strike, just to name a few. But when you read the 150 pages in this Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, that pertain to the plan to destroy the environment, you see that not if, but when it is implemented, it will undermine the quality of life of millions of Americans. It will remove critical protections and dismantle programs for communities across the nation, again, prioritizing special interest groups. It seems as though the most intense hurricanes happen more often than they used to. And if you think that is right, then you're right. You see, the proportion of the Atlantic Ocean hurricanes that are category 3 or above have doubled since 1980. And if you're wondering how climate change has contributed to this, then consider this. Over 90% of heat that is trapped by greenhouse gases has been absorbed by the world's oceans. This means the waters are getting warmer. You saw this last summer when we witnessed, I'm sorry, we saw this just last week when we witnessed the shifts that makes hurricanes stronger, wetter, and more likely to intensify rapidly. So we see them coming back to back, and we see them coming stronger and stronger, unleashing record-breaking downpours with little time for communities to evacuate. Scientists expect that rapid intensification of hurricanes will continue in the future unless drastic measures are taken to limit further climate change. Project 2025, however, aims to significantly reduce the role of federal agencies like NOAA, FEMA, and the EPA in collecting and maintaining climate and environmental data. These agencies play pivotal roles in regulating and monitoring environmental practices, and changes to their structure and functions could significantly affect the work of organizations engaged in environmental research and advocacy. Why is that important to us? It's important, you see, because the EPA, that is the Environmental Protection Agency, seeks to deregulate Project 2025 seeks to deregulate those environmental protections that we've always had. And so it reduces the EPA's ability to enforce laws aimed at combating climate change and pollution. This could lead to increased environmental degradation and public health risks due to unchecked industrial emissions and weakened environmental standards. For example, Project 2025 will affect several climate change initiatives, such as the Clean Air Act regulation, resulting in higher levels of air pollution and associated health problems. Project 2025 calls for the dismantling of the NOAA, that is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. When you remove and dismantle this agency, then what they want to do is to privatize it. So what does that mean for us? Well, the NOAA is responsible for everything from daily weather forecasts to severe storm warnings, to climate monitoring for fisheries, to coastal restoration. It supports the marine commerce. In other words, it is the agency that helps keep our world as we know it spinning and keeps it producing for all of us. If there was a storm that would come through, like the ones that we just witnessed with Helene, because this agency would have been dismantled, that we may not even get the warnings that we get now. And then also Project 2025 seeks to deregulate FEMA, even though you just heard after the last hurricane, Trump blaming the Biden administration for not funding FEMA and FEMA not having the resources. it was really just a ploy, because that's exactly what Project 2025 would do. It would cause a risk for people being unprepared for the next hurricane, the next storm, the next flood or drought, because FEMA has been dismantled and certainly would not be there to give people the support that they need when they are experiencing the worst day of their lives, when they have, excuse me, survived a storm. If Project 2025, if supporters of Project 2025 regain the White House, Project 2025 would be a disaster for the environment and for democracy, as you just heard. Again, as it advocates for weakening regulatory oversight, arguing that it creates inefficiencies. And basically, that's the whole ploy, the whole plot of Project 2025, is that it says it creates too much inefficiency. Well, what people don't realize is it may look like inefficiency, but when it's not there and you need it, you'll see just how efficient that it actually was. Conservative political allies are prepared to take a sledgehammer to U.S. climate and environmental policies. There is already proposed political agenda that has been put forth by dozens of right-wing organizations which threatens to squander the narrow time window that we have for climate action and actively fan the flames of a world on fire. In fact, our world is on fire. You may have noticed in the past several years that planet is heating up. And it is true. We say it all the time. It seems to be getting hotter and hotter every year, but it is absolutely true that it is. And so what Project 2025 does is offers no strategies for reining in the carbon pollution that causes planetary heating. All it does is dismantle what is already there. And so just this summer in Nashville, we experienced a drought. The last year was the hottest year on record. Just this week, we are breaking record high temperatures all across the United States, and this is the fall. And so we see that there is a need to protect our environment. There is a need to protect our environment against the emissions of fossil fuel use, which Trump has said on day one, quote unquote, he has said, drill, drill, drill. He is willing to gut and to drill on public lands, and turn those public lands over to private lands, just to drill for oil, so that we are not, quote unquote, dependent on foreign countries for our oil. So with the dismantling of the EPA, Project 2025 reinforces support of fossil fuels by encouraging more extraction and streamlining all the public safeguards that we have had in place. Additionally, lifting the ban on fossil fuel extraction on federal lands, which would put countless miles of rivers and streams at risk. What does this mean? That means it runs the risk of us not having our clean water to drink. We have seen that issue. I'm here in Michigan right now, and we've seen that issue in Flint, Michigan, and it continues. But then just last year, we saw the same issue happening in West Tennessee when there was a spill and the water in the river was polluted, and numbers, thousands and thousands of Tennesseans did not have clean water for days on end. And so we see that Project 2025, according to the website, what they have said is that on day one of the next conservative administration, Project 2025 represents a coordinated effort to quickly dismantle environmental regulations through executive orders and strategic appointments. And so that's what I have on regarding our Project 2025 as it relates to the impact on our environment. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that detailed outline around pollution. Um, it is important for us to understand that without an earth, we won't be here. So regardless of what the justice issues you are concerned about, whether you're concerned about your own personal issues or your neighbors without an earth. And so thank you, Dr. Judy Cummings. I want to remind our audience that's here in the Zoom, again, welcome. And we want to invite you to this conversation. So please write your comments there or questions there in the comment section, and all of our speakers will read and engage you at some point. But to continue the conversation, I want to invite Prophet Hunter. Hunter, won't you join us and share your portion of Project 2025?
Well, thank you, Reverend Sharizna John Marie. It is an honor to be here. I am Hunter Zyrek Rhodes. I am primarily during the day in adult education in the nonprofit sector, working in the correctional facilities around Shelby County, Tennessee. So I come from the stance tonight with my background as a historian by looking at this document and its impact on labor movements, on the impact on individual workers. And as Reverend Dr. Judy Cummings said, this is a 900 plus page document. So there's no way that we can possibly cover all the pieces of this massive document, which is at its core an atrocious blueprint for the further destruction of American society. And as you've seen, it attempts to promote policy that erases really any semblance of the hard fought for gains for all of us, really. What I hope this evening is that even though we're not covering all 900 pages, not all portions, that these snippets offer you a crucial insight so you can see plainly what the Heritage Foundation, what Project 2025 are trying to do. So I want to start by looking at the document itself. The mission statement in the portion of the document that regards the Department of Labor is as follows, and I quote, "At the heart of the conservative promise is the resolve to reclaim the role of each American worker as the protagonist in his or her own life, and to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life. The role that labor policy plays in that promise is twofold. Give workers the support they need for rewarding, well-paying, and self-driven careers, and restore the family supporting job as the centerpiece of the American economy. The Judeo-Christian tradition, stretching back to Genesis, has always recognized fruitful work as integral to human dignity, as service to God, neighbor, and family. And Americans have long been known for their work ethic. While it is primarily the culture's responsibility to affirm the dignity of work, our federal labor and employment agencies have an important role to play by protecting workers, setting boundaries for the healthy functioning of labor markets, and ultimately encouraging wages and conditions for jobs that can support a family." So, as you can see here, the Heritage Foundation, the organization behind this work, is attempting to center American workers as fundamental to the lives of their own families and to the country as a whole, really. But let's see if their policy really does protect workers and secure wages under safe working conditions as they claim. The first policies that come under fire from Project 2025 are those that relate to worker protections in terms of identity. The policy proposals include reversing DEI initiatives, that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. They also cut trainings on racial discrimination and cut federal funding for those organizations that provide it. The policies also restrict the application of Bostock, a Supreme Court decision, and they roll back regulations protecting against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Additionally, the Heritage Foundation presses for, quote, promoting pro-life workplace accommodations, end quote, which ultimately has as its foundational principle offering no support or accommodations for folks who have abortions. So they're not actually offering workplace things to support families and people who have children. They're just trying to restrict for people who, for whatever reason, to end their pregnancy. This proposal also dovetails with the aim that the project has to push for more protections against religious discrimination, which they interpret through a very narrow conservative Christian lens that involves the demand to allow religious employers to be, quote, free to run their businesses according to their religious beliefs. So, as you can see, if that involves any kind of particular discrimination, people can be free from any kind of accountability by saying, well, these are my religious beliefs. Overall, this is not a surprising set of demands coming from the Heritage Foundation, but what we can see is that it's a clear target against anyone who doesn't fit the normative, white, straight, cis Christian model. Regarding worker pay and benefits, at first glance, there appear to be a couple of positives. There's a push for more paid time off. There's a push for on-site childcare at different work sites. However, when we look deeper and understand what goes into that, we see that these ideas come at a cost. Paid time off becomes something that is made in lieu of overtime pay. So in one instance, they say, well, an individual can choose, do they want more time off or do they want overtime? But then in another portion, they undermine that by saying, well, really, this is at the discretion of the business in question. For example, two policy proposals argue that the Department of Labor should maintain an, quote, overtime threshold that does not punish businesses in lower cost regions, which they define as the Southeast United States, where probably all of us are right now. This limitation on overtime pay is coupled with a further restriction based on calculating overtime pay over a period of 2 or 4 weeks, meaning that if the total hours worked over that longer period do not go into overtime hours as a whole, then no overtime pay is rewarded despite what may have occurred on individual weeks. So you can see how a company might force a worker to work overtime hours one week and then cut their hours the next week so that they do not have to pay the full salary of what someone is entitled to for their labor. Beyond these pay and benefit policy proposals, worker protections are on the table even beyond the identity marker protections we discussed prior. Project 2025 aims to roll back restrictions on teenagers working in occupations considered to be dangerous, claiming that so long as the teenager has proper training and parental consent, there should be no issues. Additionally, and importantly for that point, with the rolling back of minor labor laws, Project 2025 desires that small businesses should be made exempt from any fines generated from violation of OSHA policy. So this is a move to protect businesses ultimately, but it hurts workers in a really literal sense. If a worker wants to bring their voice in opposition to these harmful policy proposals, which you would probably imagine people would like to do, this mandate at least recognizes that, quote, American workers lack a meaningful voice in today's workplace. That sentiment is undermined, however, by their proposals to reverse policies on protected concerted activity relating to forming a union, their proposals to eliminate a card check as a form of voluntary union recognition in the workplace, and their proposals to perform union busting in secret with no written disclosure on this activity. Now, there is so much more that we could discuss if we had the time. As we talked about earlier, it's a 900-page document. The Department of Labor portion is quite long too. So I encourage you to look at this specific chapter as well as the mandate as a whole. It is freely available online for you to read. Overall, though, what is apparent is that despite the appeal to the American worker being foundational to our society and the callbacks to the Judeo-Christian tradition, these policies do not support workers or their families. Moreover, they run in direct opposition to the very tradition they hope to invoke, a tradition that demands fair pay for labor all the way from Leviticus to 1 Timothy and beyond. Lest the architects of Project 2025 want to feel the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the same Lord that the author of James says these people should weep and wail in front of for the misery coming their way, it would behoove them to look at the tradition they claim and see what it really takes to protect workers. And it would behoove us, as those seeking justice in this world and in the next, to keep pressure on them, as we're doing with events like tonight, so that they understand that we, the workers, not the 1%, hold the real power, and we can create the world that we wish to see. So, Reverend Sharizna, that is what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. So much is on the line in this election. I know we say that in every election, but if we're really paying attention, so much truly is on the line. Literally, our bodies is on the line during this election. I'm going to invite Reverend Fahisha Hassan to come and to talk about the Department of Education there during from the Project 2025 manifesto. Fahisha.
Thank you, Reverend Sharizna. I just want to start by saying that I'm what I've said in the chat, in the shared space that we're in, that I'm deeply encouraged by the scholars that began. It really warms me. Somebody who has labored for a long time on behalf of liberation and freedom, to hear and to feel the fight in the way that it is articulated and continued. So I am originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, and Memphis called me. So I've been in Memphis since 2017. I am a social impact strategist and wellness practitioner. I am deeply, deeply invested in the ways that faith, social justice, and mental health or wellness work together to both sustain our resistance work as well as sustain ourselves and sustain the world that we want to build together. And kind of what was talked about, how we want to share space together as part of what democracy entails, what democracy should entail. So my section that I am covering is education. And I have been a department chair and professor, and I am now a PhD student at University of Memphis in the communication department. And so education is deeply important to me. And for more context, I'm an only child of a single parent mother household, and I had grandparents. My grandfather was the assistant assistant superintendent of schools in Kokomo, Indiana, if anybody is Indiana family. And my aunt Janice was a department chair in math in Charlotte. So I have a history and a legacy of the importance of education and the value that was placed upon that for myself, and I've lived that out. So let's get into it. The starting point that I want to go back to is that the way that Project 2025 begins is that this is a mandate for leadership, y'all. So they consider this how our country should be led. So I just want us to put ourselves in that spirit and in that time frame, because that's fairly huge. And I'm wondering how we show up in leadership in this moment, in both a response to what Project 2025 is bringing, but in the way that we are leading. And I think it was Foster who put it so beautifully, that their hope is built on unions and movements of solidarity. Same, Hunter, same. Okay, so how shall we lead? Well-funded, 8-figure, 900-page document. They want to do this through, again, executive branch implementation. That means with no legislation process. This is a direct removal of democracy, the democracy that we're framing as access, and believe it was said equality at one point, but access to power and resources within our governed state. So I know that some things can be done through that bypasses bills, but this sweeping level of legislation to be done without the people is actual and factual, as TLC said, without the people. Like, it's being done without the people. So they want to eliminate Head Start in early education. And this is huge for a couple of reasons. The Head Start supports children, pregnant folks, and families. It offers quality care during as I'm a social scientist, so I'm gonna get a little nerdy, but the critical years are between 0 and 5. And this removes quality care during that time. Head Start offers center-based programs. This is classroom care, education for at least 6 hours a day for this age of children and families. home-based services, 90-minute home visits, bi-monthly social activities, prenatal and postpartum services. This is information, education, access to care, family child care, private home daycare, specifically family-like settings, right? And then they also emphasize locally designed programs. These are programs tailored to meet the culture of the local need and area that is being served. Children that go through Head Start, super important. And I know we are not going to all agree. We are not going to all agree on all the things, but I'm just giving you information at the moment. Children who go through a Head Start are more likely to be immunized. They're more likely to receive support for diagnosed disabilities. They have significantly better social, emotional, language, and cognitive development. And then specifically children who are already perhaps in the welfare system, if they're in the welfare system, but also enrolled in Head Start, they are 93%. Listen, let the church say 93% less likely to be placed in foster care. Whew. This would, eliminating Head Start would take away, oh, not, I'm moving. There's a lot of statistics I would love to share. I don't know how we can get into that, but just look it up. Even if you just Google a cursory Google of the benefits of Head Start. And I myself, because my mom was able to get me into not Head Start, but into an early childhood education program only because she worked at the time at a community college, a really well-funded resource community college in Charlotte, North Carolina. Because of that, I was able to get in a preschool program that set me up to be able to get into an amazing elementary school, which got me into an amazing middle school, high school, and then I was in the International Baccalaureate program. Education starts really, really early, y'all. So to eliminate Head Start is really, really huge. And I should have started with the biggest elimination. They're just going to eliminate the whole entire Department of Education. And I want you to hear that. So what now? It just goes away. So there's still going to be a Secretary of Education, but the whole Department of Education goes away. Then they would deny students specifically in 25 states and DC any access to student loans, specifically because their in-state tuition provides for migrating humans without documentation. And I want you to hear that. I rarely say like undocumented, especially like as a noun, right? These are migrating humans without documentation. And that also means regardless of where they are in the documentation process, right? So they won't get access to loans, but also anybody else in the state is then bullied into also not getting access to student loans just because the people, back to the people power, the people in that state have said this is what they want to do through legislation. So the federal government will come say, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to prioritize our special interests over what the people say that they want. They would cut the federal loans. I kind of talked about that a little bit. So they're turning it into quality education is only able to be accessed by the wealthy. And I think someone talked about like by the elite. And I mean, think about the legacy students and how a flashlight was shined on that, right? So you have parents of legacy students who are really just mad that they can't get the entitlement that they're used to. Back to access and equality and the people. The Secretary of Education would remove all protections for LGBTQIA students, specifically in public schools, and would remove this through Title IX protections. And I mean, I want us to think about how important things like shelter are. Shelter hopefully is protection from weather. This is removing protections for safety for children. This is a problem. They would also, I wanted to highlight, they would also disproportionately fund, and this gets really intricate, but they would want to disproportionately fund international business programs. Are international business programs bad? Of course not. Please go learn about the global markets. We live in a global society, but they want to only fund that and not fund arts and different types of way of things that you would learn in specifically like liberal arts education, where you have a set of courses that you need to take before you get to your primary courses, your concentration courses. So they're really, this Project 2025 is really setting to meet the needs of capitalism rather than meeting the needs of children. And when we think about the historical framework of not just society, but community and this world that we live in together, I mean, think about the creatives, think about the artists, think about the things that nourish us that are not just math and science. Math and science are huge. Global markets are great, kinda, but disproportionately unfunding those to fund these other things are a problem. Lastly, the same type of thing in the charter school system, they would loosen data collection. So this is their way of saying, you know, we're not going to take note of the types of identities of students that are in these charter schools. So then we don't have to be accountable, track, or name if there are discriminatory practices occurring in these areas. This would also define sex. Now, we're talking about Department of Education, right? But the ideology runs throughout Project 2025, and it would define sex to mean only biological sex assigned at birth. So this, and it states it as a fixed biological fact, which both as a social scientist, and if you talk to most medical science folks, will tell you that's not actually real, people. So anyway, it would put it into transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming students would be at much, much greater risk. And then lastly, because this is Googleable and we were talking about it in our chat ahead of time, recently, again, 45, which is the most I can refer to him as, 45 did an interview with Fox News and outright named that one of the commentators talked about how what if a place in what they said a progressive or a liberal state wanted to teach a new history, y'all, a new history that talked about slavery, like somehow slavery is new, and then talked about that the fact that we are all on stolen land. What if that wanted to be taught and discussed in schools? 45 outright named that they would be denied funding. So they're also going to weaponize federal dollars to only fund the ideology that a very specific set group of people want, which is the opposite of democracy. This is the opposite of the ideal that we have yet to live into. We are yet in the fullness of what democracy can be. So imagine the stripping of this level of protections, of definitions, of funding in a way that only covets ideology and does not support and nurture the people who make up our society, particularly the least of these. Thank you, y'all.
But he shared you were talking. I saw that interview as well and was mortified about the idea of the discrimination based on what is being taught, specifically our history. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. And then we want to invite Reverend Kelly X. Reverend Kelly X will come and talk about banking. Kelly X, many folks who are planning on voting for Donald Trump suggest that Donald Trump is good for the economy. And again, we're not here to tell you how to vote, but we are here to inform you when you vote. Many folks suggest that he's great for the economy, regardless of his character, regardless of his behavior and rhetoric. He's great for the economy. And here in Project 2025, this 900-page, thank you for that correction, Reverend Dr. Judy Cummings, 900-page manifesto, banking is one of the highlights. Won't you share with us this evening?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Him and his many bankruptcies are perfect for our economy. So as was stated, I was given the opportunity to look at the Federal Reserve. And the first thing that I think is important for us to understand about the Federal Reserve is that it was created in 1913 in order to really stop runs on banks. That prior to 1913, there was a system in which each bank created its own. They had their own bank loan situation where basically their own money that was set up, and depending on which bank you attended, you could then go and use their own currency, your banknotes. And what was happening is that banks were not doing their due diligence and making sure that they were having enough money in the bank in order to then cover the accounts that were already there. And in the process of those times, what would happen is that people would find out that the bank doesn't have enough money, and then they would go to the bank and try to get all their money out. And in the process of that, would bankrupt the banks, and then everyone who doesn't get their money doesn't get any money. And so what Project 2025 believes is that, or what it is saying is that the implementation of a Federal Reserve, which then funded and backed banks to make sure that they do not go out of money quickly and causes the end of run on banks, who made sure, whose role is to maintain, to help to reduce inflation by looking at what is the rate on loans, as well as who have a system that looks at how many people are employed. And in that employment time, what it does is helps by keeping record of who is employed and who is not. What that does is it helps to make sure that as many people as possible who want to have jobs can get it. And when that number is too high, allows for adjustments to be made in the markets and to allow for more people to be employed. And what Project 2025 says is that this entire department needs to be removed, that there is no need for the Federal Reserve at all, and that we need to return to a free banking system, a system in which banks create their own bank notes and people are allowed to leave. And so, for example, during the Panic of 1837, there were 343 banks out of the 850 banks that existed. That's 40% of banks were allowed to fail because there were runs on bank, people coming to get their money. And what that meant is when there are runs on banks, not only does the bank fail and close, the people who have money will not have access to that money. They then go belly up in that process as well. And what that means is that it is setting up an opportunity for the rich to get richer and the poor to not just be poor, but to be desolate. That there is no concern about the financial welfare of people, and there's not a concern for people to have the capacity to work. And also what happens is in the process of deregulating, removing the Fed, it also then deregulates banks. And in the process of deregulating banks, will take away those protections on who is able to have access to banking and who is able to have access to money and loans. What that also means is that if banks are responsible for having their own bank notes, then it will then set up a system in which certain banks' money will be considered more than other banks' money. We also, as an African American and as a descendant of the enslaved, I already understand that there's a system that is set up to defund everything, to undervalue that which we do, which will then once again cause more issues around the financials and what value of what that which we have, both in the bank, but also the value, the possibility for home ownership. And that's the part that is, once you deregulate, and part of that other deregulation will also, removing the Fed and deregulating banks, it would also then allow for elected officials to then control what interest rates look like, because it goes at the whim of politicians, as opposed to this nonpartisan body that then allows for regulation that holds it across the board. They also, the other piece that I want to connect to this is that that in addition to removing the Federal Reserve, Project 2025 also desires to get rid of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And it may not, and the reason why I want to bring those two together is because when you get rid of the Federal Reserve and you deregulate banks and you move into a free banking system where banks are creating their own bank loans, and you get rid of deregulations on who can receive loans, and you combine that with the removal of the of HUD, what happens is they also desire on the housing Department of Housing Urban Development to get rid of the affirmatively furthering Fair Housing Act, which then further makes sure that stops discrimination on the basis of race, gender, and that it makes sure that people have access to housing even if they are not married. It takes away all of those regulations, and in the process of taking away those regulations, what that then means is sets up a system that allows for redlining again. And what we understand as descendants of the enslaved is that part of the reason why African Americans' wealth is so low, and for our community having a negative net worth, is because we were kept out of the financial system, and in particular when it came to owning home ownership. So when veterans were given the opportunity to buy loans and have access to federal loans, African Americans were not given that access. And because of that access, that home not being passed down then reduces the capacity for wealth building. And now that we are in the process of wealth building, to then remove those regulations will then once again set African Americans and other people of color back from being able to build wealth and to maintain their financial solvency. Essentially, what this Project 2025 look at the the Federal Reserve, essentially what it does is ensure that the 1% will continue to grow in wealth without having to have any concerns about the poor. It will then allow for the possibility that banking becomes once again like playing the stock market. It will then set up for folks to not want to put their money or anything into banks. That goes back to mattress, under your mattress being your bank. But also what that also does is not allow, it makes it even more risky for people to utilize the financial system as a way to build their wealth. And it sets up an opportunity to make sure that the poor remains poor. This system is antithetical to the Christian faith that it is saying that it is a part of, because it does not take care of those who are in need. It does not allow for a safety net. Instead, it allows for people to fall, to crash, and to burn. And at the same time, not make sure that there is space for full employment. Those other regulations, safeguards around this. The implementation of Project 2025 with the election of a conservative president will be detrimental to the financial well-being of this country and of our people. And this will harm Black folks in particular, but Black folks as well as poor people in general. It will be detrimental to the future and the capacity for us to grow any type of wealth, because all those who will be able to do so will already are the 1%.
Thank you. I'm taking a deep breath because this is a lot. This is a lot. Again, I want to remind you all, please share your reflections and questions there at the comments. I want to invite Dr. Judy Cummings once more back into this space. We've heard so much about discrimination already, and yet Project 2024 have a section around discrimination. Dr. Judy Cummings, won't you share about the ways in which Project 2024 will implement discrimination across society?
Project 2025.
Sorry, Project 2025. It is
No,
Tuesday.
I'm taking a deep breath. I'm taking a deep breath too, because this is a lot, you all. But because it is so much, we have to take the time to dig into it. We do not have the luxury of standing on the sidelines, okay? But what I did do for you, because it is a 920-page document, is to put it in the chat. I put a link to a 48-page summary. And so, and when I finish, if I think about it, I'll also put the link to what the Urban League, how they have also looked at Project 2025, so that you can just get the summary, you know, the bits and pieces of it. But it behooves all of us to really dig into this project. Now, I hope that you do not think that Project 2025 is only aimed at BIPOC people, that is Black, Indigenous people of color. It is not. It impacts millions and billions of Americans across all spectrums. But what I do want to talk about right now is how Project 2025 will enable discrimination across our society. So threatened by just decades of progress, and we've made a lot of progress in advancing civil rights and inequality or equity for all. The authors, however, of Project 2025, as you have heard, want to create a country that allows for more discrimination, where we live, study, work, play. They want to roll back all the hard-fought victories by movements that have made progress. And so what you have heard and what I want you to hear is this: the supporters of Project 2025 essentially want to force our country to conform to a white Christian nationalist and modern day white supremacist society that removes rights for any opposing group of people. So they don't care if you're white, if you're European, if you're Asian, they don't care. They want to remove rights for any opposing groups of people. And so as you talk about enabling discrimination across our society, that's one of the tenets. And so the question is, how do they do that? How will they do that? How do they think that they're going to do that? Well, we've already seen a lot of test balloons. We've already seen the test balloons that have gone up to dismantle the DEI Act. In fact, is President, the candidate for VP, what's the guy's name? JDDD
Vance. JD Vance.
And Representative Michael Cloud, they already introduced the Dismantle DEI Act back in June 2024. And what that act, the bill that they put forth would eliminate all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and the funding that goes along with them. So they're not just satisfied to be able to do that on the federal level. Now they also want to encourage those private, as you heard Reverend Hunter talk about, those private employers to do the same. So currently, as we're on tonight, there are more than 30 bills across the country targeting DEI funding, the practices, and promotions at schools. As of May 2024, 10 bills have already been signed into law by governor. 2 in Florida, 1 in each of the Dakotas, right here in Tennessee, Governor Lee, 1 in Texas, 1 in Utah, 1 in Alabama, 1 in Idaho, 1 in Iowa. They're already assigned. And so experts say this is the most extreme law in the country restricting DEI. Is restrictive on college campuses. Only a few other bills I believe in the past have ever reached the final stages of approval. But you know that's one in Kansas. But besides all that, there are bills that are being put forth. And so the majority of those bills are still moving through their state legislators. And so understand this, test balloons have already been sent up to see if it's possible. And because now they know that it is possible, because those states that I just named, including Tennessee, already signed on for it, they know that it's possible. And so on day one of this conservative White House, if in fact DJ gets what is his name, DT gets put in there, will be put into practice. And so how do they do it? Again, embolden, that is encourage racial discrimination in everything, as you heard Reverend Kelly X talk about, from housing to Reverend Vahisha Hassan talk about, to education, to Reverend Hunter talks about, to employment. So encouraging racial discrimination in housing, in education, in employment. Project 2025 proposes that the president should remove a key tool that the federal government uses to enforce civil rights protections. And that tool is this. It is called the Disparate Impact Standard. And that standard has been long used in determining discrimination under Title VI and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. What is it? The Disparate Impact Standard, the DIS standard, is important for evaluating when facially neutral programs have disparate impacts on certain groups of people. In other words, when they look at you and they can tell you not white, that you're not European, that they can discriminate against you. This tool keeps them from doing that. The Civil Rights Division of the DOJ determines that the Disparate Impact Act does the adverse effect of the policy or practice falls disproportionately on a race, color, or national group or origin or group. So the DOJ uses this act to say this, when people bring a case, this falls under this act and it is disproportionate due to either their race, the color, or their national origin or group. Well, when that's gone, you won't have a leg to stand on. And so when you think about what Donald Trump did back as a realtor who would not rent to people of color, that was against the law. Then we're under Project 2025. It will be okay, not only for him, but any landlord would not have to come up with any excuse except to say, I don't rent to people of color. I don't rent to BIPOC people. This standard provides when it is in place, provides an important remedy for the DOJ and others to bring civil rights cases when groups of people have their civil rights violated in areas of employment discrimination, which we know that happens every day, and in fair housing, as I talked about. So discontinuing its use will make it harder for the federal government to enforce civil rights protections in everything, again, from housing to education to employment. In their own words, in this mandate for leadership, courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt intentional discrimination, such results might suggest discrimination. This doctrine, talking about Project 2025, this doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by a future administration. This is what Project 2025 wants to do. It wants to end it legislatively or through a narrowed regulatory process by a future administration. That's on page 72 of, on page 72 and page 583 of that 900 and some odd page document. How else will they do it? How else will they enable discrimination across our society? Well, they'll make it harder for historically under-resourced communities to access Medicaid. You know who that is. That's BIPOC people. They will make it harder for under-resourced communities, as Reverend Fahisha Hassan has said, to access Head Start and other government programs. Population counts can be essential to groups receiving appropriations and resources from the federal government, like Medicaid, Head Start, community mental health programs, and much, much more. That's why it's so important for us to complete the census, right? But under the Project 2025, that won't matter. It won't matter because what Project 2025 plans to do is to undercount or undermine the accuracy of the counts, and that would hurt communities that have been economically marginalized. In other words, the resources that we get now, because we did participate in the census, we would no longer get those resources. Then there are special interest groups who are behind Project 2025, and they want to reverse the longstanding body of work by civil rights activists who have encouraged the federal government to collect more sophisticated data when it comes to racial and ethnic groups, again, through the census, right? Because it helps to ensure that communities that have been under-resourced because of their racial demographics receive proper allocations of resources. So I'll just give you this example. Right here in Nashville, for 40 years ago, we were fighting to get Clarksville Highway, which runs from Northwest Nashville all the way to Clarksville, Tennessee, to try to get that, particularly the urban portion of that highway redesigned. Well, they promised us 40 years ago that it was going to happen. It just happened this past May. The project was just completed this past May. And so these are the kinds of things that under Project 2025, it took us 40 years to get it, and it wasn't a Project 2025. Can you imagine how many years it would take us to get the resources that we need to improve our communities, to improve our education, to improve our ways of life under Project 2025? As recently as March 2024, the Biden administration issued a revision to the Statistical Directive Number 15. That bill governs standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting federal data on race and ethnicity. So whenever you fill out a form, that's a federal form, you have to put your race and your ethnicity. They collect the data, right? They're collecting that data, not necessarily to be nosy, although sometimes it is, but also to make sure that depending on the zip code that is attached to whatever document that is you're doing, they can see who it is and where the resources need to go. Project 2025 would do away with all of that. A new conservative administration would take control of this process, thoroughly reviewing any changes. That's on page 80 of that document of Project 2025. Project 2025 would advise, now hear this words right here, they would advise a future administration to hamstring these revisions by instructing the White House Office of Management and Budget to reverse them and ensure that other federal agencies are not aiding in the collection of more accurate data. That's that part, but I want you to hear that word. Project 2025 would advise a future administration to hamstring. That's an important phrase, because not only has to do with the discrimination piece that I'm talking about, but that's in everything. This Project 2025 is a mandate for leadership, for conservative leadership, for the conservative promise. It is going to advise the president what to do, how to do, because they've already seen in the first administration of 45 that he was off the rails, right? Project 2025 keeps him on the rails for what they want to accomplish, a talking head. I hope you hear what I'm saying. This is serious. Project 2025, this would leave historically underrepresented communities at a disadvantage when it comes to accessing critical programs, everything from Medicaid to Head Start, everything. Well, how else would they enable discrimination? Well, under Project 2025 for discrimination, it would undermine gender equity across the government. Project 2025 would eliminate the White House Gender Policy Council, which is key to promoting contraception access, gender-based violence prevention, and women's health equity. We need to pay attention to what this project is doing. Under the Biden administration, the White House Gender Policy Council has led efforts to increase access to contraception, published a national plan to end gender-based violence, and began groundbreaking research into how women's health is studied across the country. Project 2025 would immediately disband the council and prioritize coordinating efforts that push for promoting life and emphasize a narrow vision of what defines a family. A narrow vision of what defines a family. That's on page 62 of this mandate. How else would they enable discrimination across society? They would allow more discrimination against LGBTQ plus youth in adoption and foster care agencies. Project 2025 would make it easier for state and child welfare agencies, which are charged by the public to provide appropriate care for children, to cite religious exemptions as a way to promote bigotry. You all, this is huge, because if it works, I don't care how you feel about LGBTQ plus, but if it works in this area, the next area it's going to work is in your lives and in your issues. In 2022, more than 368,000 children were enrolled in foster care in the U.S. Project 2025 would instruct, hear me say this, the Department of Health and Human Services to repeal a 2016 regulation that provides additional protections for foster youth related to sexual orientation and gender identity. Can you imagine? Enabling adoption and foster care agencies to subject vulnerable children to the whims of extreme religious beliefs would be detrimental to the physical, mental, and emotional health of fostered or adopted youth, especially LGBTQ plus youth who are already dealing with intense adversities. Enabling discrimination across society, how would they do it? And I think this is my last one. They would put Black communities and others that have historically borne the brunt of health impacts from pollution and other environmental harms at increased risk. Since the 1970s, I live in Nashville, where the city dump is. I have been trying and advocating since 1976 to get that dump closed. Without these protections, without the protections, eliminating the EPA Office of Environmental Justice, eliminating external civil rights, we have not seen the detriment that will happen. Putting Black communities and others who have historically borne the brunt of health impacts from all of this pollutions and other environmental harms at increased risk, and they don't care. Eliminating, again, going back to the EPA, that office would put communities at risk for all kinds of hazards. I'll stop. Do I have time for just one more? Just one more. Enabling discrimination on sexual orientation and gender identity by misinterpreting Supreme Court precedent and allowing more religious exemptions. Project 2025 will roll back protections against discrimination against LGBTQ plus people and others in the workplace. LGBTQ plus Americans have had to fight for protections under the law, and in recent years have witnessed some gains that Project 2025 would roll back that progress. It would reverse this progress. Again, I don't care how you feel about that community, but as the saying said, when they came for them and you didn't say, and you didn't speak up, when they came for you, nobody spoke up for you. Project 2025 plans to restrict the application of critical 2020 Supreme Court case. I don't know if you're familiar with the Bostic versus Clayton County that assures workplace protections for LGBTQ plus people, but it would eliminate all of that. It would subject all of us to forms of sexual discrimination that up until now has been prohibited by civil rights laws. I'll end with that. But just understand that Project 2025 will roll back and severely limit protections and leave already vulnerable people at risk for discrimination when trying to rent an apartment, go to school, or much, much more. And so thank you for the time. Again, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. If you are watching, we know this is a lot of information. I mean, I'm getting my own words mixed up. This is a lot and it can be overwhelming. But I think it's important for you to hear the facts, get the information, be informed. And so this is recorded and we're going to circulate this within our network. If you would like a copy of this, you can go to the Christian Church in Tennessee's Regions Facebook page. It's in some of our Facebook pages as well. But as we close out this here, I'm going to invite Dr. Judy Cummings, Reverend Kelly X, Reverend Vahisha Hassan, and I believe Marcy's still here. I invite you all back. Unfortunately, Hunter had to go, but I want to invite you all back for closing remarks. And in your closing remarks, I want to ask you to answer this question: why should we vote? We've heard what's at stake, but I want to invite you to the homes of many people who might be watching tonight or who'll be watching later on. We have an opportunity come November. I mean, you can begin now in terms of early voting to put your voice, to put your choice, to exercise your right to vote. Why, Reverend Kelly? Start with you in your closing remarks. Why should we vote after hearing all of this? What's at stake? We know what's at stake. Why should we vote?
Thank you again for this opportunity for this evening to have this time together. I know it was a lot. It's a lot. It feels so overwhelming. And I believe that is the reason why we get an opportunity to vote, to go and use our voice. It feels very much so as if we are being silenced. This Project 2025 agenda wants to remove the work of the legislative branch and move it all to the executive branch. Yet we, the people, have an opportunity to let our voices be heard, to be able to elect those who will actually listen to what we have to say, who understand that our issues, our situations are just as important, more important, because we are the people. And so when we need to go and vote for folks who really want to be a part of a representative government, to represent the voices of the people, to represent the needs of the people, to represent the situations of the people. And we get an opportunity to do that right now. We don't even have to wait till election day. Right now, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., go vote and be able to see that actually so many gains have been made already. That I was so taken aback by the possibility that last week when I went to early vote, that everybody that I got to vote for, and even some of the people I got to not vote for, were all women. Women of different races, of different social economic backgrounds, of different ethnicities. Like, that was a powerful thing, considering just the short amount of time that women have been able to vote. But we are making great gains because we are productive people in this society. So let us act as so. Let's do that. And let us vote not just for ourselves, but for our community. Let us think about the least of these. Let us show up and in love and in peace. And let us think about those who don't live in this country, but who the policies of this country affect. Let us vote in ways that we might be spreaders of peace, not of war. I think we have a great opportunity. As heavy as it is, we've got a great opportunity to show up and give voice to those, especially for those who don't think that our voices matter. So that's why I say we go vote.
Reverend Vahisha, thank you, Reverend Kelly X. Reverend Vahisha Hassan, will you join us and share your thoughts? Why should we vote? Someone's watching tonight, still unsure whether they want to go and vote or not. They don't really like either one of the candidates. And why should they vote?
So, to be totally transparent, I am one of those people. And I don't know if that's why Reverend Sharizna said that in the preference. She deeply knows me. I am one of those people. I am deeply grieved in my soul on a soul level of the rampant way that evil and empire are working together to dehumanize and disregard life across our planet. And this election is part of that. And that dynamic shows up. So what I will say is that this was a really hard question for me, and something that I personally wrestled with. I have already voted in early voting, and I just went ahead and did it as I completed my version of the wrestle. But I'll say this: it's everything is resistance and liberation for me. So it's either resistance to oppression, or it is a liberation into living into freedom, right? Everything. That is everything. And I am by all the means necessary, human. In my movement work, I do specialize in a piece of the work that I hold and I nurture and I learn and I continue to grow. But that piece is part of a larger ecosystem, right? Of the ways that those work together. So I am by all the means necessary. I do not pretend at all that electoral justice is the saving pathway to freedom. I can't give that to you. I can't give that to myself. My vote alone still has to be renewed in this country. So how I'm gonna sit here and be like, oh, this is the way. But it is one of the pieces of fabric in the garment of freedom that we are trying to weave. And I don't need another holy garment with a bunch of holes and patches. Freedom in our lifetime is possible. And I am going to engage that weaving, that fabric by all of the means necessary.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. Judy Cummings, there's someone who's watching tonight who is voting because of one issue, and yet we've listed many issues tonight. Won't you speak to them, speak to their hearts, and help them to see that this is not just about one issue. There are many issues here that we listed and many more that we haven't even mentioned.
Yeah, so I would hope that they would go back to the beginning of this podcast, this Zoom, and listen to our scholars as they talked about democracy, because it is more than about more than one issue. But I want to close with just a little hope. And the hope is this: it's not over. We are still the people of these yet to be United States of America. And we still have a say in how our country operates. Authored by the Heritage Foundation and its network of supporters, Project 2025 is a collection of dozens of authors and hundreds of contributors in the conservative movement, lays out a plan for for the next presidency. However, the creators of Project 2025 and its advocates are the minority. The creators of Project 2025 and its advocates are the minority compared to millions of people whose lives this proposal would uproot. We just have to keep doing the education. However, this makes this election year, because it is on the ballot, democracy is on the ballot, cloaked in Project 2025. It makes this election year so important. So we must all vote for the future of America, the America we want to see. If we want this country to remain a democracy, as jacked up as it was, even as a democracy, we must vote and show up in November. Early vote.
Thank you.
But a few ways that we can just stand up to stop Project 2025, which is what we need to do. And we already know, again, this presidential election season is already well underway. Folk are already early voting. I think early voting in Michigan here starts Saturday. So I'll be sending this out to the friends up here. But everybody have to take time to understand the election. You got to understand what it is you're voting for, not a personality, not a person. We have to listen to the debates, monitor the polls, engage in election information sessions to learn more. We have to, and we also have to vote. It's important now more than ever that we vote on all levels. I think one of the scholars said earlier, we got to vote down the ballot. You can't just stop at the president. We got to vote down the ballot, because we can have a situation like we've had before. You can have a Democratic president and a Republican House, and you can't get nothing done. So we got to let our Congress know that we strongly oppose this agenda, and we need to take immediate action to stop this threat to our democracy, freedoms, and our civil rights. And that's what we need to do, and that's what I'm encouraged to do. So thank you. Thank you for having me on tonight. It has been phenomenal. Thank you.
Finally, Marcy, I'm going to pin you, Marcy, as we close in this place. You are the future of this country, and this is your second presidential election where you get to vote, but there's someone possibly watching where this will be their first. Why don't you speak to the future of this country in terms of why their votes matter as we close in this place?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that I did throughout high school and undergrad was bringing youth together and letting youth know that their voice is so powerful. Even before they could vote, learning how the process works, learning how important that it is to our country, learning what that meant before revolution, when we didn't have that, and what that meant, and how important this is for so many people. And people will often say, I don't think my vote matters in a presidential election. If thousands of people think that, and that stops thousands of people from going and voting, that's the difference between, for a lot of people, freedom and not freedom. That could be the difference for me and my fiance between having the ability to have children or not. To be married in states where it's legal or not. And so this is something that, as a poli-sci major in undergrad, I talked to so many people about. I registered so many people on my campus to get them to realize that someone in your life, yourself, your partner, your best friend, again, your neighbor, someone is going to be affected by how you vote. And if you care about those people and you want to see good human life, you have to learn how to love and put that love into the ballot. And, until we learn how to do that, it's a scary place. It really is. But my hope as a young person is that more young people are going to feel this revolutionary voice of, I can't just stop at the ballot. I have to go further. I can't just stop at sharing on social media. I have to go further. So
Thank you.
I want them to know that they have a place at this table. Absolutely.
Thank you. Marcy said, learn how to love and put that love on the ballot. With that, we leave you. Thank you and have a great night. Bye-bye.
You want us to stay, Charisma?